Hello, my name is Tabs and welcome to episode 102 of the Growth Podcast. Now, I hope you're all doing well and enjoying the off season and feeling fit and healthy and in good shape for the summer months or winter, depending on the hemisphere that you're listening from. And that's quite a relevant question for today's pod, as today is a bit of a special episode. It's an injury special, focusing on the injuries in football, but in particularly the injuries Arsenal have suffered this past season. It's been pretty woeful and quite impactful. And we do have an expert on the show to talk through those injuries with us. But it isn't the person I'm going to introduce now. Joining me today and help us have the discussion, dive into the injury woes is Ian from Ask Cannon Picks. Ian, how are you? And how are those hamstrings and ankle ligaments holding up?
My hamstrings are basically made of cheese at this moment in time, at this stage, and yeah, I don't even know what ligaments are anymore. I don't think my body has any, but I'm good. I was just saying to our guests before we started, I'm going on holidays on Sunday, and I finished up work today, so I am in the finest of form.
Very good, very good. Nice to hear. Going anywhere nice? What are you up to?
Going to Spain and then a little sojourn over to New York for a few days. But yeah, really looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, good stuff. Right. So on to our guest. So we have Dr. Andrew Mitchell joining us today. He is a British academic specialising in sports science and biomechanics. He serves as a director on the board of Chartered Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences and is an associate dean and an associate professor in biomechanics at the University of Bedfordshire. His academic background includes a PhD in clinical biomechanics from the University of Chichester, an MSc in sports medicine and kinesiology, yeah, you can correct me later, from the University of Tennessee, a PGCE and a BSc Hons in sports science from the University of Chichester. Dr. Mitchell's research focuses on lower limb biomechanics, particularly the mechanisms of ankle sprains and lower limb injuries. He has published 35 journal articles, book chapters and funded reports, in addition to 43 conference presentations and 6 keynotes. He has secured more than 1.5 million in grant funding and provides consultancy to elite athletes, professional teams, and companies such as New Balance. He's an accomplished endurance athlete and has been completed 9 Ironman triathlons and multiple marathons, which is something I can resonate with and relate to, and is the only thing I can relate to in the above that I've just discussed. He's been on the Arscast with Andrew Mannion twice, but we don't like to talk about that because this is the place to be. He's a friend of the pod. We know him as Mitch. Mitch, how are you? And I hope the listeners are still listening after the intro.
I'm good, buddy. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on. We're going to... Yeah, in the notes you've got here, is Ian's body a lost cause? So
yes, is it a lost cause? I think there's a short answer to that one.
It's a very short lost cause at this stage. Yeah,
I would love to get you in the lab if you're ever over my way. We can put you in the environmental chamber and kind of simulate, kind of as if you're running on the top of Everest or in the Sahara. We can kind of do all kinds of things. Put you on the treadmill, loads of cameras on you, loads of little bits, and see what your body's doing. Or we could just pretend and not do that and just say, back in the day, you're an elite athlete. That's what I say.
Back in the day. Is there a test where I can lie on a bed and eat a burger or something like that? Is there?
There is a lot of actual research where people come in and just have to be sedentary for the day. Seriously. Sedentary behavior research. Yeah, and they just measure your blood glucose and stuff just to prove that it's actually not good for us.
Yeah, I'm down for that.
Sign up for that.
Very good. So what my wife said, whatever you do, don't talk about your knees and your ACLs and your ACL reconstruction. So I won't go into that. But that's my experience with all that jazz. So I've got one functioning and one that hasn't been repaired since the age of 16. So there we go. But that's another story. Right. Anyway, but not only is Mitch all of that, he's also an Arsenal fan, season ticket holder. And all the rest of it. So and we will touch on that a bit later and find out a bit more of his interest into Arsenal, all the rest of it. But for now, yeah, how did you become an Arsenal fan? What got you into supporting Arsenal?
Yeah. So I'm third generation Arsenal. My grandfather worked quite high up in the London Met back in the day, and as a result, he was in charge of N Division, which is basically Islington. So he kind of sat in the director's box for every single home game. Used to go on the trains to the away games back in the day. Was at the Islington Town Hall for the 71 double winners banquet. So I'm kind of third gen. My daughter's at Arsenal as well, so she's fourth gen. But just always, one of my earliest memories is about my own identity as a human being, as being an Arsenal fan. It's just kind of early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. It's just one of the things I remember is, I guess, my nationality and the fact I was Arsenal.
Wow, very good, very good. And as I said, we'll talk about the end, a few highlights from your supporting career. But in terms of the career you've landed upon, chosen, and all these accolades and all the work that you've done, how did you get into that? What drew you into this field of work and medicine?
Yeah. So it's two things I love, and it's sport and medicine. And as a kid, I grew up with a lot of kind of illness things going on. I was born with a condition called spina bifida, which most 99.9% of people with my condition are in a wheelchair. So I had, I think, 25 operations at Guy's Hospital and Great Ormond Street over the years. So I kind of grew up in a medical environment and just loved it and felt safe there and was fascinated by it. And then sport was the kind of way that I kind of expressed myself as a kid. And then it kind of became like sport education, which is, I haven't really left school yet. I've been in either school or university my whole life, and I'm 50 odd. So my mum still thinks I'm a PE teacher, which I'm not, which is fine. PE teachers are fine, but that's what she still tells everyone. But yeah, I just kind of, you leave, do your A-levels, go to university, and then just kind of haven't left yet. So I've been doing this for around just under 30 years, kind of something to do with sports science, sports medicine, education. And it's hard to leave when you've been doing it that long.
Yeah, indeed, very good. And wow, to actually to do all the, I thought I was doing well doing 4 Ironman and with only 1 ACL, but you put that into shame, having done 9, and with the condition you've had in the past. So that's incredible dedication and tenacity and effort to do that. So yeah, well done.
Thank you.
No problem. So as I said, let's get onto it. So we know that this season, Arsenal have suffered quite a few major injuries to critical players, and it's contributed massively to how the season's played out. But not just the injuries themselves, because all teams suffer injuries, but it's the severity, the surgeries, and then also the compound injuries and the cumulative effect it has on the rest of the squad. And doing some research, if we look at some of the key ones we've had and how much football that players have missed, is like, we've Havertz. Now these stats may not be accurate, but they give a sense of what its impact has been. So Havertz had missed about 14 Premier League games and with a hamstring, and he required surgery. Saka had missed about 13, again hamstring surgery. Odegaard 8, ankle, but that was recovery. Gabriel, I think he's missed about 7 games, his another hamstring and surgery. Ben White on his knee had missed 17 games, surgery. Jesus, an ACL, surgery. Timber now with his ankle, surgery. But then we've also had the likes of Calafiori and his dodgy ankles. Mourinho body slammed, required. I think he required surgery. Martinelli even had a hamstring, but that was luckily recovery. And then Tomiyasu, I think he's that archetypal picture of someone just covered in bandages in a hospital bed, sort of thing. So not a lot we can do about that. And look, and in terms of how we fare compared to the rest of clubs in the Premier League, I think there's these stats going around. We've suffered 36 injuries to play, of significance to players this season, and that puts us 4th behind Brighton, Tottenham, and Ipswich. And in terms of the number of days lost, again, we're 4th with 1,297 days lost in the Premier League to players. And again, Brighton, Tottenham, Ipswich are there. And whereas the likes of Liverpool and Forest are towards the bottom of these leagues, and look at the seasons they've had. So I mean, very simplistic. It's a very big question, and to start things. So Mitch, what's your assessment of Arsenal's injury situation this season compared to previous years? Why so many? Why the severity? Is there an underlying cause, or are we just unlucky?
Yeah, I mean, I sit just up about, one block over from me, and then I often look over when there's another one of our players rolling around the field, or they're limping and they're still on the pitch, and you kind of wonder what's going on. I think the thing to do is to try to look at the injuries over a period of time, not just a single season. It's really difficult for fans to do that. I get that. But from season to season, so many things change that it's hard to compare this season to last season. So, for example, this year we played 58 games. Last year, last year. Sorry, only 2 years before that, we played 43 games. That's 15 games difference. That's all those players having to play 1,350 extra minutes to actually get those games played. Last year, we had a pretty good injury record. I was having a look back at the data today. We had 1 or 2 guys out with things, but in reality, compared to this year, it's absolutely chalk and cheese difference. And I think it's a combination of things where a number of injury-free seasons have caught up with us. We probably didn't get we didn't get the average number of injuries last year, but we got over the average this year. And it seems like with the injuries we've had, they seem to be worse than normal. We haven't had any touch wood. We haven't had a leg fracture in a long time. Remember, we had that run of Diaby, Eduardo, and Ramsey, but we seem to be struggling a lot with the kind of hamstring and the tendon injuries. It's really, really difficult to kind of point to one thing because it's so multifactorial. Because all those guys playing the minutes, they're all playing different numbers of hours or minutes and games for their national teams. They're traveling to a different amount, so it's easier to go over to a France game than it is to go to, let's say, Brazil for the 2 centre halves. But it's just and luck. Yeah, how do we define luck? The statistics have really been against us this year, and it's really difficult to kind of point to one thing. We'll definitely talk about the things throughout this pod. There's a lot of things that might come up, but it's just been such chalk and cheese compared from this year compared to last year, and there's bits I think they could maybe do differently, but in reality, I think they've just been unlucky.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it does feel like that. It feels like that, but I'm sure we will look on it, that things that we can manage that luck, so to speak, or mitigate some of it, and I was just saying before I got into again a question here. You said that we're not having the fractures, but in my understanding is that actually those, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that injuries related to muscle and tendon and soft tissue injuries are actually worse than fractures, because bone repairs pretty strong, and that's it. And well, again, correct me if I'm wrong. And the weakness potentially isn't there. Whereas muscle and tendon injuries, once you have like something quite severe, it's never back to 100%. Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I would say that all three of us here, not too different in age, but I think if we all broke our leg, we'd all heal absolutely differently. If we all tore a hamstring, we'd heal absolutely differently. If I had a choice between breaking a leg or having a significant tendon hamstring injury, I mean, both of them aren't great. I think it's the bone does heal. It heals very differently to ligament and muscle and tendon. But the problem with bone, it has a really poor blood supply. So the healing is a different stage, whereas a muscle has a higher blood supply and will heal quicker. Tendons, less of a good blood supply, so tendons are quite avascular. But in reality, neither of them are great. I wouldn't put my hand up for either of them, especially the types of hamstrings we're getting this year. We haven't just seen little out for 3 weeks, slight pull. We've seen significant hamstring injuries.
And is there, well, and that leads me on to this question, is there a reason why there's more of these severe soft tissue injuries around muscle, around tendons? It does seem to be, more severe, or it feels more severe because they're requiring surgery. So are they more severe, or is it the fact that surgery now is less intrusive? Less surgery to me was always the last resort, whereas now it feels like, well, actually it's less intrusive. Get in, get out quickly. You will speed up recovery because just technology and recovery recruitment, and everything is stronger. So does it feel like they're actually more severe, or is it just the treatment of them is sort of this, making it look different?
I would say they're absolutely 100% more severe because they're not going to operate if they don't have to.
Oh, really? Okay.
Okay. Surgery's the last resort where possible. They really don't want to go down the surgery route. Maybe back in the day, they'd have said, let's see if you can, they call it conservative rehabilitation, where they don't operate. But now if it's required, they kind of go in and do it. The problem with injuries, UEFA have done some really good research on it, and the overall injury rate is actually reducing overall in both training and matches. Okay, ligament injury rate is reducing. Knee ligament rate, injury rates, so kind of knee sprains, ACL, MCL, things like that is reducing. The problem is that we're seeing an increase in hamstring injuries, and over the last 20 years, it's gone from 12% to 24%, so it's doubled.
Wow.
and days lost due to hamstring injury has doubled, obviously at the same time. About 1 in 5 hamstring injuries is a re-injury, and of that, about 2/3 ish, 70% ish, occur within 2 months of returning to play. So that early kind of those first 2 months are so crucial not to overplay the player at that point. The challenge and the different types of injury is the challenge we have, because there isn't currently enough data to tell us why hamstring tendon injuries are recently increasing so significantly. We need more and more data to actually see why that is. And the more data we get from kind of high speed sprints, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, and high intensity work, we need more of that to be able to then overlay that data on the guys that then get the tendon injuries. But I mean, I don't remember the last tendon injury that I was aware of, and obviously the club don't have to release all these specifics, but the last big hamstring tendon injury that was an avulsion fracture, which we'll probably talk about in a bit, that I can think back to, and I've kind of done a little bit of research on, was Thomas Rosicky.
Oh, right, that's a while back.
Yeah, that's a while back. Yeah, we've had hamstrings since then, but not any that kind of will require this kind of surgical intervention. So yeah, it's as we say, it's a combination of loads of different kind of multifactorial. It is multifactorial, but we'll talk about that as we go through. I think the challenge is people kind of what's the word? People just being aware and not kind of. It's very easy to go off the club. They've overplayed him again. He's injured. Yeah,
it's too simplistic.
99. Exactly, it's too easy to say that.
Too simplistic. And just a couple of questions, and maybe Ian, if you've got anything, is that, and it was touching on one of the points that you said about the increase in these soft tissue injuries and stuff like that, or particularly hamstrings. One theory I heard, I can't remember the podcast what it was and who it was, but they were saying that the strength that the players have now, and the strength and conditioning that they do, is that there's maybe an imbalance in the fact that the muscles, and again, biomechanics way better than me, but the muscles are actually getting are stronger and more robust to a certain point, but the tendons and the ligaments that they work with are not keeping up pace with them. So there's an imbalance there. That means that when they do these power moves or do something more powerful muscle based, that actually it stresses the ligaments and the tendons even more. So therefore, that could be a cause for injury. Now, I don't know if that's if that makes sense, or if that's a logical conclusion, or a thing that could be involved.
Yeah, I think it was on the Football Vision podcast you might be talking about. I think it was one where Darren Burgess.
Yes, that was the one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Darren Burgess, ex-Arsenal,
now in Australia.
Yeah, that was the one.
Now back in Oz working in rugby. Actually, he's Dr. Darren Burgess. Sorry, he's got a PhD now. That's basically what he was saying, wasn't it? He was saying that he feels that the muscular tendinous unit, which is the bit that attaches bone all the way through muscle, tendon, and then bone at the other end. He was saying that the muscle was getting almost, the capacity for the muscle to work was stronger than the capacity for the tendon to manage the forces. And I think that's where, again, the club don't always, quite rightly, because why would they, but the club don't always share what's actually wrong. And there's very specifics of the injury with the athlete, both for they don't want their opponents to know, and also they want to kind of keep the value of the athlete as well. But these avulsion fractures we're talking about, an average hamstring strain happens in the middle of the muscle or near the end of the muscle, where it joins the tendon. But what we're seeing with avulsion fractures is the tendon there's such an aggressive contraction of the hamstring that the tendon actually pulls out a bit of bone from where it attaches to the bone. So we're talking about these as muscle injuries, that's the correct way to define them. In reality, that's a bone injury, because the bit that's damaged is actually the bone.
Right.
And then this is the challenge for the medics and the physios and the sports scientists at the clubs and kind of epidemiologists kind of worldwide, and that's people who study injury, is trying to work out why that is. And the next stage will be, how can we strengthen the tendon bone joint? It's not really a joint, but where the tendon and the bone join, should I say, to try and make that not be the weak link. It's like you're doing a tug of war. The weakest person's going to let go first.
Yeah.
In this instance, it seems, at least with these athletes, where the tendon goes into the bone, that's what it's being pulled out, which then becomes a very different rehab than if the athlete had just strained a hamstring muscle.
And on that, you say strain. So actually, one thing we always hear is, "Oh, it's a grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 hamstring injury or
Yeah.
whatever injury." What is the gradation about,
Grading.
and the injury recovery times and seriousness of those different injuries?
Yeah. Okay. So there's 3 grades. The kind of classic one, the kind of hamstring tweak is it's called a grade 1. It's a microscopic tearing with a little bit of swelling, and minor discomfort, and then little to no loss of strength. So that muscle will still perform pretty well when they do the muscle test to look for damage. That's non-operative treatment, so that we don't have to go anywhere near surgery for that. And again, depending on the athlete, it could be it's a number of weeks. Again, depending on the athlete.
What, the 3-weeker? That's what they normally say. It's a 3-weeker.
Classic. Yeah. Some people recover quicker, some people don't, and some people might need 4. But yeah, something in around that. Then you've got the grade 2, which is a partial tear, but there's significant weakness. So the person, when they do the muscle test, when you compare left to right, the injured leg is much worse. That's the kind of next step up above the 3-weeker. That again is non-operative. That is a kind of out for a reasonable amount of time. So kind of above the 3 weeks, but not going into kind of significant periods of months. But again, depending on the athlete and depending on both their resilience and their healing process, their healing powers, but also how they approach the process of rehab, because their commitment to the training is also important. That would be a grade 2. And then a grade 3 is a complete rupture with a total loss of function. So that's actually a tear in the muscle where the muscle isn't attached anymore. And that grade 3 requires either an open or an endoscopic surgery. So, and again, I'm not an orthopedic surgeon, but they basically have to go in and attach the muscle together. And that is depending on the person, 4 to 6 months, which is getting nearer to what we've seen for some of our boys this year.
Wow. No, good. Well, yes, good. Yeah. And so in terms of recovery time, so yeah, we said the 3-weeker and then obviously the surgery, then you're talking about 3 months for whatever, and grade 2, that's sort of somewhere in between. I'm assuming.
Yeah, exactly, somewhere in between. And there's another way that people define the grading. So some people do it by percentage of muscle fibers damaged. So if they say grade 3 is 100%, which means all of the muscles are torn, they're not attached.
Oh wow, okay.
A grade 1 is 10 to 15, maybe percent of the fibers damaged, and then a grade 2 is anywhere from that little 3-weeker to just being this side of a
just hanging on by a thread, basically.
literally hanging on by a thread. Exactly. Yeah.
There we go. I know all the terminology.
Yeah, exactly.
Ian, do you have anything? Do you have anything to add or ask at this moment?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating listening to Andrew, and it's like the one thing that stands out, and I do have a question for Andrew, but one thing that stands out when you read out all those stats tabs about how few injuries Liverpool had and some other teams, and how many we had and how many days were missed. It's just an absolute miracle that we finished second in the league. It's an absolute miracle, and I think Mikel Arteta and the team the coaching staff deserve so much credit for that. I just wanted to say that it's when you see it written down like that, it's like, well, I think I mentioned before on the pod, Liverpool, when they had their bad injury season back in when they finished 5th, I think they had probably about I'd say 3/4 of the injuries that we've had this season, and they didn't even finish in the Champions League spots. But just to say that. But Mitch, we were talking about having surgery. Like we know that it's kind of the last thing you want to go to, but I was just thinking of Thomas Partey last season. Or was it last season? He had a bad injury and he went under the knife straight away, and he's come back this season and he's barely been injured. Do you think there's any correlation to and is this a reason why maybe the club have gone down the surgery route with the other guys that Tabs mentioned earlier? Because maybe there's a long-term benefit in kind of not having re-injuries or the same injury occur again. Is there any correlation, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be learning lessons all the time. I think that the thing with Partey that's an interesting one is everyone says that he was an Iron Man when he was at Atletico, never got injured, came to the UK, came to Arsenal, and he's injured all the time. Well, in the 6 years he was at Atletico, he played 4 seasons of 30 games, 1 season of 13 and 1 season of 16. Since he then came to Arsenal, his first 3 seasons were 24, 24, 33. And then obviously this year he's done much better. He was never kind of an Iron Man in inverted commas. He was never kind of a 55, 60 games a season. And let's also not forget, and I said this on a previous pod once, away at Burnley in the Prem is much harder than away at Benidorm in La Liga. And I'm not disrespecting La Liga, but once you go out the top 6 or 7, it's not the same as playing teams near the bottom of the Prem, and the intensity is absolutely greater. Even the surfaces that they're playing on are totally different, and the way he's been asked to play is very, very different. But you're absolutely right, in that whenever they get an injury, the sports meds, sports science team are going to be learning from that in any way they can. And a lot of people are kind of like, oh yeah, flipping Arsenal, another injury. I wish they knew what they were doing. They literally eat, sleep and breathe. I know for a fact they eat, sleep and breathe, trying to protect these athletes and trying to ensure availability. It's being able to say to the manager, yeah, this guy's available to play is just absolutely huge. The challenge is these guys are probably playing a bit too much football, and they're probably playing in certain situations different kind of football when they go away to international. Obviously, recently, Arsenal was sending a physio with Thomas Partey, weren't they, to Ghana?
They sent someone just to make sure he wasn't running around too much.
Because they weren't sure about something, so they've said, "Oh, sorry, we've got to send a physio," which I don't disagree with, but. It's almost like kind of a hire car. You lend, these international teams, they take our players, abuse them,
valuable assets,
send them back. Yeah, how many players come back in the day? Van Persie went away with Holland, got injured, was out for months. There's so much history to that. So I think the challenge is for them to try and learn from the other guys that get hurt, but also they'll continue to adapt their return to play criteria and their rehab processes and their prehab processes. So once you're injured. So Tabs, with your knee, you, for the rest of your career at Arsenal, you'd be having some very specific additional knee exercises to try and keep that ticking over.
Yeah,
they wouldn't just say it's not hurting anymore. Don't worry about it. We'll give you the same exercises as an 18-year-old Miles Lewis-Skelly who's bulletproof. They'd kind of be giving you very specifics, like Walcott when his shoulder used to always dislocate. They'd have been giving him so much additional work to try and keep that in. And not dislocating. But the challenge is they're then going out and they're running into big 6'5" goalkeepers and being pushed on the floor and kicked, and can't stop that.
No, anyway, I look forward to my Arsenal career. But thank you. But I know the prehab stuff because I did so much work strengthening the muscles around the knee before the surgery that you do that. But on that, so that's a really good lead into one of my questions I've got here is around the medical stuff. How much say or how involved are they in the decision of who's available or who plays at a weekend? Because obviously it's 3 people involved: the medical staff, the manager, and the player. How does that sort of holy trinity or whatever work together, and who has the final say in terms of what happens?
Yeah, so the club doctor, which is Zaf Iqbal, he would have the final say, and he's obviously got a really big team of physios that he works with, and obviously sports science and a wider medical team, so masseurs, etc. But it would definitely be Zaf. I don't see a situation where.
So he would rule over Arteta.
If Arteta's told by the medic, by Zaf, the club doctor, this guy should not play, he shouldn't play.
Wow.
That's again, the caveat to that is if it's a Champions League final, last game of the season, and you strap him up and you go, look, it's your risk. Can you do 10 minutes at the end? That's a different issue. Okay. The problem we have is when players do that mid-season. Yeah. Yes, they're very brave, and it happened a few years ago with Ben White. He played up at Newcastle, and Rob Holding was saying, "Oh yeah, he was totally injured. He was destroyed. Yeah. He missed the next few games because he was injured.
Yeah,
because he played in that one game injured, and then it made the injury worse.
Yeah,
but yeah, the medical team shouldn't be overruled. But if it's something like concussion, any kind of threat to life, all football matches, there's actually an independent doctor who's like a neurological specialist who will make that call. Kind of separate to the Arsenal team, so that doctor would then have that kind of oversight over both clubs at the game.
Okay, but then also, I guess there's a lot on the player as well, because they will say, "No, I feel fine." So even but all our machines and probes all suggest that your leg is somewhere over there, and it's just a flesh. The old Monty Python, just a flesh wound. I can carry on.
That's the problem you have is so many players will say I'm fine.
Okay. And then obviously the manager's under pressure because he has to win every game. But on that point, what's interesting, because actually So the Ben White thing. So they say, oh, he's got even if it's just a grade 1 hamstring,
Yeah.
or even a grade 2. How much actually? How what is it? Because there's certain injuries I literally just cannot walk anymore, or the rest of it. Versus I can play, it will bloody hurt, and it's gonna make it even worse. But I can still play. So with some of these injuries, especially the soft tissue, well, the soft tissue ones more than I would suggest the bone ones, because if it's fractured, it's fractured. You're not going to carry on to, well, for a leg anyway. How much of a restriction is it to someone being able to perform at the highest level when they've got one of these grade 1 or grade 2 injuries?
Yeah, I mean, it's a significant restriction. If it's a grade, they definitely shouldn't be playing. If it's a 3, they should be off the field. If it's a 2, depending on how bad it is, between 10 to 15%, up to 70, 80, 90%, it's significantly dysfunctional. It significantly impacts your function, your ability to accelerate, decelerate, change direction, jump, land safely.
Okay.
A grade 1, you can probably get through the end of the match. But what we need to remember is, as soon as there's soft tissue injury, there's bleeding inside the muscle. There's bleeding in and around the potentially around the tendon as a poor blood supply, but there'll be bleeding at the ligament as well, potentially, depending on the injury. You can't run that off. That's happening. That your body will start to bleed if it feels when there's kind of torn fibers. You can play through that to a point, but eventually it'll catch up with you. It might not be that game. Then it might be the next day you go into for your recovery session, and then they look at it and it's massively swollen.
All right.
The challenge is that we're trying to educate players, agents, partners, everyone, the coaching staff, into not having that kind of that old school gung-ho, yeah, play hurt, great, yeah, well done. Because it doesn't help if you play this one match, but then you miss the next 5.
Yeah. No, but as you said, if it's last game of the season, you need the points, then you can manage. But yeah. So look, you touched on it, and I think it's not quite the elephant in the room, because everyone really talks about it. Is around a lot of people thinking these injuries is because of the amount of games played, or the amount of minutes played. Now, there was a sort of report or a study done by, I think the guy's name's Bern Murdoch, one of the analysts at the Financial Times, and there was an article around this, and in saying actually, on average, the actual number of minutes and the distance run and the number of minutes played by players actually hasn't really increased for greatly since sorry, I'm just trying to look for my notes here, but since maybe 2000. So since 2000, they've done a load of studies around that. Hasn't changed massively, and majority of players are playing within the 55 game threshold, which is recommended by FIFPro. Obviously there's going to be variance to that, but in general. So the whole idea about it's the number of games played is maybe maybe a distraction or an easy conclusion, but what it really boils down to is actually the way the game is played, and the fact that the number of sprints has increased massively, and the number of passes, and just the involvement and general involvement of play, and so on, which is really that intensity, and it's those bursts. So actually, and the reason why they're suggesting that versus the minutes is because now we've got more subs and all the rest of it. Actually, it balances it out. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, you've seen my show notes, and we've sort of discussed this. So where do you find that correlation between, you were saying, number of games played versus how we play the game and injuries?
I think I wouldn't be as concerned with the number of passes, because the majority of passes, I'd argue, are probably sub-maximal.
Yeah.
They're not it's not like they're striking a penalty, like their life depends on it. But the number of sprints has gone through the roof in recent years, and the ability to repeat that sprint when you're fatigued late in game is where the players have an increased risk of injury. We see most injuries in football in the last 15-minute third of each half.
Okay.
And that's where the players are just getting towards the end of their kind of capacity. And it's the maximal sprints that cause a hamstring strain. They're not if you're lying on a sunbed in the Maldives, you're not going to strain a hamstring. It's those massive maximal sprints that these guys repeat and repeat and repeat. I mean, the fitness of these guys nowadays compared to years ago is absolutely through the roof. But the ability to repeat those sprints is so impressive. However, as soon as you do that, you're increasing your risk of injury. But also, at the moment, we don't have data that shows the difference between the number of sprints in a home versus away scenario in relation to game state. So when you're defending all 11 men behind the ball, does that change the type of sprint you're doing? Is it more lateral? Are there more kind of vertical jumps and landings as a result of kind of people just pinging the ball into the box? Does the number of sprints change if you're winning? If you're winning 2-0, 3-0 in the first half, does that change in the second half? So this data, it's slowly being put together, but we need years and years and years of it for us to kind of have a proper data set. But it's I did a lecture, a presentation at the London Marathon Conference one year, and I kind of did it half and half with a guy called Dr. Rasmus Nielsen over from a Danish guy, brilliant academic. And every time I said, it could be footwear, it could be, this is about running injuries, I said, it could be footwear, it could be gradient of the surface, it could be the type of surface. I went through all my things, and he kept saying, you're right. However, running is the thing that's causing the damage. Because if that person was on a graded slope and they weren't running, they wouldn't get injured. If they had the wrong shoes on and they weren't running, they wouldn't get injured. And this is the thing with the sprints in football. If they weren't doing those maximum sprints, there isn't a mechanism to tear a hamstring. The force required to tear a hamstring is massive, absolutely huge. It's like when people, if you've ever heard anyone or know anyone that's ever ruptured an Achilles, some people say they can actually hear it happen.
Well, you say you hear pop, don't you, or something like that? Yeah.
And it's so bizarre that in some instances people rupture an Achilles. I mean, completely tear it in half, and they can't feel it. They're just like, it doesn't hurt, because you've literally ruptured all the nerves that actually tell you it's hurt. And a colleague of mine is a former England netball captain, and I was talking to her about it, and she was like, I literally walked off the court, and she said, I was telling everyone I'd ruptured my Achilles, but no one believed me because I wasn't in pain. And she said, no, I know what I'm doing. I've ruptured my Achilles live playing netball in the Commonwealth Games against Scotland. She was like, I've ruptured it. And I was like, no, but you're not in pain. She said, yeah, but I can show you I ruptured it. Her calf muscle was behind her knee, like literally up there.
Oh, wow. Okay. Is that what happened? Okay. Yeah. I was just trying to work out how you
just attaches.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's the sprints that we're concerned about. You know, if this was the pre-season game against the Austrian pub side like we used to under Arsene Wenger, people aren't getting hamstrings.
They said that sprints have gone up like 30% just in the last decade, and look, and again, you compare the stats. So compare Forest to Arsenal. So you know Forest, as I said, they were towards the bottom of the injury and one season, but like they only had 673 to 1297 days lost, and they only had 20 days lost to injury compared to our 36. But their style of play is counter-attack. It's just sit and wait. So yes, there's sprints involved versus we're much more high intensity. Yeah. You know, we have slowed down a bit this year, but we're a lot more about high intensity press and those short sprints to try and cover the ball or even progressing the ball. So you can there's causation correlation, not always the same thing, but you can just see something there. But I also wonder if there's anything particular, not just say the tactics, but what I've found is particular, say our fullbacks. Now or defenders, we have a lot of injuries at fullbacks and stuff like that. And now back in the day, Winterburn and Dixon up and down the flank, it was just one directional, so sort of up and down. So there wasn't a huge amount of, again, naked eye lateral movement there. It was very just up and down, tackle, up and down, tackle. Whereas now our fullbacks are it feels to me there's a lot more different movement, a lot more lateral rather than vertical. They're inverting. They're asked to do a hell of a lot more. But then you look at Zinni, White, Timber, Calafiori, Tommy, all playing in fullback positions. I mean, luckily MLS hasn't, but I put that down to being 18 and he got and his ligaments are are super stretchy and not going to be an issue. So do you think there's anything in that in terms of how the players are asked to play and that style rather than just the tactics of a high press?
Yeah, the UEFA do some good stuff, and they funded a lot of really good football research. Well, that's about the only good thing they do. They funded a load of research we've been doing or that's been carried out for years, called the Elite Club Injury Survey, and they have data that absolutely says, depending on your position, you're going to have slightly different injuries. So we know that forwards and wide players have got the highest injury incidence. especially non-contact muscle injuries, which is what we've been talking about so far. Goalies have the lowest incidence, but the highest incidence of upper body, which makes sense. And then defenders are more likely to have kind of contact, tackle, aerial duel, clash ahead type things. So if we extrapolate that across to what you just said, which is absolutely correct, Ab, it's a really good point, we will see more injuries for our fullbacks. But then when you look at it from a tactical viewpoint, Ben White and Mars Lewis-Skelly play very different positions, or even Jurian, when they're playing right back and left back. But their data on those kind of studies would be pulled into the fullback data set, even though we know Miles is inverting.
Yeah,
and therefore is then a midfielder and is probably going to increase his risk of those midfield injuries, whereas Ben is maybe kind of overlapping and is and is sometimes on the goal line, but on the other team's goal line, and then maybe at risk of a attacking injury, which is that kind of muscle injury. So because of the way Arsenal play and the fluidity of the tactical approach from Arteta, I think it will be harder for us to nail it down to a position. However, you're absolutely right. We've had a really bad run on the fullback area, haven't we? The guys you just listed, really, really unlucky, and not always the same kind of injury. But we've had a combination there of both joint and soft tissue, so hamstring and calf. It's normally kind of hamstring calf. It's less likely to be quad, which is obviously at the front of the leg. However, you do see a lot of adductor, which is kind of groin injuries as well. And you can tell straight away when these guys get hurt, like a hamstring, they'll hold either just below their butt cheek or a little bit further down to in the middle of the hamstring. That means it's a hamstring. If it's an ACL, they'll sit on the floor and they'll hug their knee to their chest.
Yeah.
And we can tell from a mile off. The challenge we've got is if we try and protect these guys and play them less, playing less and then coming back to football is actually an injury risk in the same way that playing too much is. So you've got to find the happy median.
Well, I was going to say that is sort of known as periodization. I think the terminology is, or something like that. I can't remember. Or we know it in terms of when we trained for Ironman, our events. I actually found that I was at my fittest when I was racing the most. But when you race is when you're potentially more susceptible to injury because you're pushing the limits of your body, your body's fatigued, and more. But I felt my strongest because I did a period where I was like racing every weekend and recovery during the week. So sort of just on that piece, everyone. So like what was it? Preston away, Saka comes on for 30 minutes. Now is that better for him doing that, or should he completely sit it out and do a training session the next day? So sort of explain that whole piece around staying match fit and how to balance that out.
Yeah. So as I said, the challenge is not playing the guys too much, but also not playing them too little and then expecting them to play a lot of football. With reference to the Saka at Preston, I can't recall where he was in his rehab process and how much he'd done before that. And
no, this was pre-injury. So this would have been this would have been October time in the Carabao Cup or whatever like that. I think he came on, but it was an example anyway.
But it's a good example, Taz, because you can still say, does he need to play 30 minutes away at Preston?
Well, that's the argument, isn't it? Everyone's going, why is he playing and all the rest of it?
Yeah. I think the thing is the injury risk in matches is 7 times higher than in training. So we know 20 minutes in a match is going to increase their risk of injury compared to 20 minutes in training. However, the concept of match fitness, whilst kind of slightly subjective, if we look at it from match fitness and sharpness, that's slightly different to is he cardiovascularly fit enough to run around for 45 minutes, an hour, 90 minutes, and then plus injury time potentially. But the concept of periodization is talked a lot in football, and you're absolutely right, Tabs, with reference to when we did our kind of Ironman training and kind of triathlon and marathon running and that kind of stuff. It's really easy to periodize for an Ironman because I know exactly when it is. I know exactly when my training races are. I know exactly when I'm going to do a half Ironman or a marathon in advance. And as long as you're happy to train when the weather's crap, you don't need to ever miss a training session, especially if you're swimming in the pool. The problem with football is it's almost impossible to do that. Because at the beginning of the season, they don't know when the fixtures are, because a lot of them move anyway. Oh, now you're playing Crystal Palace. They're in the Europa League, so you've got to play them on Sunday, which then means your next game might change. And being able to manage the intensity and the load of your athletes is so difficult. It's like where an Olympic shot putter, great. We know 4 years in advance when that event's going to be, very nearly to the week within the actual Olympic schedule. Whereas in football, it's in most cases the sports science guys I know who work full time in elite football, they get the guys in as best shape as they can at the beginning of the season, and then they hang on for dear life.
Oh,
The
really?
things you hear where people say, "Oh, Pep likes starting people slow," and that I'm not sure he does that on purpose. I think it's just a way that things have worked out for him. I don't think you purposely say to an athlete, "We're going to keep you out for the first 20 games of the season, but I'm expecting a great second half from you," because you just lose the guy. So yeah, periodization very, very difficult in football. And the other challenge is you don't know when during your process that athlete's going to be plucked away from you to go and sit on an airplane for 9 hours and fly to Ghana or wherever the guys are going over to get international fixtures as well, where someone else again is looking after, in inverted commas, looking after your athlete or managing your athlete.
No, that's a tricky one. So I just wanted to touch on something else now. But Ian, did you want to add anything? Or was there anything on your mind that you wanted to?
No, that Pep example is very interesting, because we do, like, and as fans, and this is why it's great having somebody like you on, Mitch, to kind of pour cold water on these things. We often, as a fan base, and I include myself in this, we come up with these silly ideas of why things are happening, and but yeah, there are reasons behind all of this, and it's clear now as we're talking to you. I am laughing to myself here. You mentioned earlier on that like you're not going to pull a hamstring in the Maldives. I can absolutely promise you, when I'm in Spain next week, that I'll pull a muscle reaching for a beer somewhere. I'll prove that theory wrong.
Yeah. For non-elite
Look
athletes,
forward to that.
I was in a library in London the other week because I was, before going into a different university for a meeting, I was in a university library, and I lunged down to plug my laptop in and slightly tweaked my hamstring. And I kind of made some strange noise, and the librarian looked at me and, bless her, and just shook her head. And I'm like, it was a deep lunge, but I just felt a slight kind of, oh gosh, I should have done that a bit slower. But no, you're absolutely right. For people like us, it's very easy.
It's very different, yeah.
Stuff.
Well, one thing I sort of wanted to touch on is it's sort of related that I wanted to bring into this is it's around maybe player fatigue or again, and it's around the idea of number of games played, and there was and also in terms of how that impacts your performance and just from a skill perspective, or just sort of like just generally, like how you went, he's just dropped off a cliff. And there's this idea of the 500 game mark. I think Jonathan Wilson wrote an article in the Guardian earlier this season, and it was sort of referencing Raheem Sterling, and we're trying to think, 29, he can't be that bad. What the hell's happened? And you get 29-year-olds, you get Harry Kane, Lewandowski, whatever. To that, is there something to be said about that every player, give or take the variance, has 500 games in them, and then after that, their performance drops off. They're more susceptible to injury, or they're trying to protect themselves more. I don't know. Is there any thoughts on that? Have you heard of that or anything like that?
Well, yeah, I haven't heard of that concept, and I don't know what Jonathan's background is, but
he's just a miserable Guardian columnist. That's all.
But no one from a scientific viewpoint is talking about that in the same way he is. So.
Okay, sorry, a bit of a technical issue, but we're back, and we're just discussing the idea of Raheem Sterling. Sorry about that, guys. but yeah, so that whole 500 games article, I think, is a bit as it comes from sort of an old school thinking that there was a rule of thumb by the elderly coaches, and it suits Jonathan Wilson. However much they play, whatever age they start, a player has 500 games in them. So do you reckon that has some credence, and could maybe lead to injuries later on in life or as a football career?
Yeah, maybe. I think it also depends on how. I think nowadays we're looking after our players much better than we did 15, 20 years ago. It might be that the average number of games over someone's career is in and around that. But I'd have to look at the data to kind of see, is that high? It does seem reasonably arbitrary. It's like a nice kind of round number. But I think what's interesting is the more we see athletes who suddenly, so Lacazette in his last season at Arsenal didn't look like he could do a thing. Goes back to France, finds his level again, and scored goals again. But he couldn't score goals in the Prem. And I think it depends on the player. So Modric, the reason I love Modric, I think he's 739, 740 games into a 20-year career. is he was never fast, and he hasn't lost being fast because he was never fast. He was just always super skillful and technical, which he's still got. Whereas if you look at a Raheem, I'm not a pro licensed FA coach, but he was never that great at football per se. Technically, he wasn't like a kind of a Fabregas skill set, but he was rapid. And as soon as you lose the rapid, you then suddenly drop off a cliff. I mean, I think I read a statistic that said he didn't have one shot on target this year for Arsenal. Is that true?
I don't know. It would make sense. He did score.
He did
He
score a
scored
goal.
one, yeah,
Okay,
against Preston. So,
Yeah.
but that might not have been on target. We don't know. He could have done.
Could be a deflection.
He scored. It was from 1 yard out. I think he scored it.
Go.
Yeah.
But yeah. So as soon as he loses his pace, has he got anything else to offer? Maybe not, because other guys are more maybe more technical than him. But no, I wouldn't. We do need to look after our guys younger, and I think we also need to educate them. I always used to feel bad, not bad. I always used to cringe when Wilshere used to get fouled. I just felt he let go of the ball 2 seconds too late, and then get nailed.
He invited
Yes.
the dangerous
contact.
his
I
ankles.
don't feel like he ever learned from that, and I kind of got rid of it a bit quicker. You very rarely saw Fabregas get fouled as much, similar era, because he would get rid of it quicker. He was a bit more aware. But yeah, I think looking after the guys a bit better is important. Early on in their careers.
And this is sort of why I raised it, because we're looking at players more and more, younger and younger. We've got MLS, we've got Waneri, we're going to have Dowman. You know, he's not even 15, he's just 15, hasn't done his GCSEs yet, for crying out loud. So we're getting, everything is about youth, about young, it's now about getting the players in 21, 22 and so on. And they're starting at such, and they've already played thousands of minutes already at that age. And I would say the load is equivalent, because their bodies, well, for me anyway, their body's at the stage that they're playing at. So it's not like, so it's not like, well, it's youth football, so it's easier. Well, yeah, but they are youths, and so therefore their bodies are not are still adjusting to doing that, or they are getting so much stronger. So they're, when your body's sort of not, or you haven't grown into your body, whatever. And the point is, there's a lot of big football being played. So I thought I'd just raise it as a point, as in, will this over time, will we see now a lot of players, just becoming less and less, say, being able to deliver, depending on the style of player, because they'll be subject to injury, because they've played so much at a young age, and they're always playing catch up.
Yeah, we may actually see over the next 10 years a reduction in the length of the average length of career of guys, because of the intensity of the games they're playing, compared to if they're playing less intense games, they might have 600 in them, or whatever the total minutes when that all gets added up in, just because it's a different intensity level. And again, with Max Dowman playing up, I mean, he's still a child. He's legally a child. He's not even allowed to change in the same changing room. He has to have a chaperone when he goes on trips and things. But you're absolutely right, Tabs. When he's playing an adult fixture, that's adult minutes. That's not him playing up against some other 16-year-olds. And when he gets run into by Virgil van Dijk, that's a grown-up that's just nailed him, or Chris Wood or wherever, big guy, or even a kind of a small, kind of snappy centre midfielder. It's adult minutes, and then you're getting your risk of injury is adult risk of injury, not under 18s anymore, under 16, because you're playing up.
Yeah, and everyone's keen to see these players, and we love seeing them. But this is why I think, I think Arteta has been very good. It is about managing those minutes. And even though we desperately wanted Waneri to come on those last few games, we think, well, why hasn't he played in the last few games when nothing's on them? He should be playing, but we don't know what's the background. He's still growing. There could be something there, a little injury, a little knock that you can't think of this season. You've got to think about him next season, the season after that. MLS looks like he's built like a brick shithouse and can take anything at the moment, whereas Waneri, he's a bit more skillful, tricky, and maybe more susceptible to injury. So I think it's a tough one, because fans want to see it, but they need to. I always trust the fact that you've got these specialists that will see them day in, day out, have all the numbers of all the minutes, and the manager's not doing it to spite you as a fan. He's looking after the welfare of the player and I'd rather respect that sort of manager than one that doesn't care and is thinking about himself. So So looking ahead, so looking forward to next season and season to come. But what do you think we can do potentially to reduce the injury risk? Are there any lessons learnt? And what about the players themselves? Because I mean, I don't know if you know, but Millie Bright, Chelsea and England's centre back, I think she's centre back, pulled out of the women's Euros this year, citing physical and mental fatigue, and I think mental fatigue has a big part to play into this. So yeah, what is it we can do other than just be luckier next season?
I mean, I've no doubt that the medical and sports science team have already evaluated last season. They've already got a case file per significant injury for all of the athletes. Every athlete will have a really focused evaluation, and like I said, just to talk to people about the intensity and the let's say the focus of training that actually takes place at this level. Every single drill will be videoed in training and then will potentially be evaluated. Every single drill will have the heart rate they should be working at, the distance they're running, the speed they're running at, sprint distance, number of high-speed sprints. I mean, everything is absolutely monitored. They're all over it. And then the data, they've got more data than they probably have time to deal with. And one of my PhD students works at Luton Town Football Club, and we were talking the other day, and he showed me the kind of drill catalogue that he's got. And every single piece of information is in there. Number of players, time of day it was done, drill timings, the breakdown of the size of the drill. And they're absolutely focusing on everything. So I think they'll come back to Ian's point from earlier. They'll learn some lessons from the potential injuries. Were people nearer the red line than they or do they need to move the red line for certain players because they've now seen that guy? If you get him within 70% or within a certain number of minutes played within a certain tight period, isn't that good? Guys coming back from international travel, do they need to maybe give them a bit longer to protect? So, I know for a fact that the Arsenal docs or Dr. Zaf and his team will be not leaving any stone unturned to evaluate every single athlete. Every single rehabilitation process will be absolutely strictly monitored. The challenge is, as you say, trying to manage the risk of the ones that have got injured, because we can't forget the biggest risk factor for getting injured is having that injury before. So if you've done your hamstring, it increases your risk of a hamstring injury significantly more than any other thing in any other mechanism of injury. So once they're injured, you've got that for the rest of your life.
Wow. Okay.
As a potential risk factor. Sorry, as an existing risk factor for potential re-injury. Even if you've got back to strength, same kind of level on both legs and you're symmetrical, everything's good. The highest thing we see for people, the highest risk factor is previously injuring or having that injury.
And is that a re-injury of the same injury, or the fact that, I noticed, the closest thing I can notice is that because of my left knee having a ruptured ACL and never being repaired, I then had injuries in my right leg because I was making up for the weakness in the left leg. So my right ankle, and I did the ACL in my right knee and all over. So you basically just transfer or whatever the word is.
So a hamstring injury will increase your risk of having another hamstring injury. However, if you get a knee injury to yourself, so we call that the primary injury, that's the initial injury. But that knee injury, especially if you run around a lot, will increase your risk of having a secondary injury, which could be anything from hamstring on the same leg, calf on the same leg, groin on the same leg, or those same things on the opposite leg. But equally, it could be, if you've got an injury to your left knee, it could be right lower back, it could be right mid back, right glute, because your body has to adapt. Our bodies are amazingly clever, and they, without us making decisions, they keep us balanced and they let us run on kind of unstable surfaces where people are diving in at us on a football field and balance and maintain balance and control. But if that's there, just a slight asymmetry for your deficient left knee or a deficient hamstring, or someone coming back from an ankle sprain or a calf, every time you put your foot down, if there's asymmetry, it's increasing a potential risk. Even if it's a small magnitude, it's increasing your risk of injury. But I know for a fact the guys are all over it, so we'll just have to trust him.
Yeah, no, and I think there's small things we can learn as well. Like, so the Odegaard injury. Now you can't stop some big thug clattering into you onto a pitch, because that's just football. And actually, this is one of the things that it bugs me a bit when these are footballers. They want to play. Their job is to play football, and your job is not to protect. Your job is obviously their health and welfare is obviously number one priority.
Yeah.
but that's also their job to play football, and your job isn't to stop them from playing football. It's to how can they play football. But what happened was, so before the game they went away, so it was the one that Rice got sent off, so all of a sudden extra fatigue on the players for having to compensate for another player. I think Odegaard picked up a small ankle injury during that game, and was a bit it wasn't quite right, but then they let him go away on international duty. Now our thoughts on international duty is very different to players. For some, they love playing, they're representing. He's captain of Norway. He wants to play. So you don't want to stop it from that point of view. But also, we need to be a bit more Alex Ferguson as well. No, you're not going away. You're staying here. Your number one priority is this club. We're sometimes, I think, too nice as a club, and we should sometimes put your foot down and say, look, you'll have plenty of chances to play for Norway. You're playing Kazakhstan, for Christ's sake. You'll be fine. Let Haaland go away and get injured. You're staying here, and I think we need to learn a bit more, just be more Alex Ferguson.
And there does seem to be a little bit more international football than previously back in the day.
Yeah,
they've tried to make all the
or competitive football.
Yeah,
it's no friendlies now. It's all competitive.
Which is pointless. Yeah, and I think as soon as someone's got a slight tweak, there's a chance that'll increase the risk of them having a full tweak the next time they try and change direction or land from a jump or accelerate, decelerate. Obviously, I don't know the ins and outs of his specific injury, but
the
challenge is again trying to educate the guys to make the call and the decision themselves. I think a few times this season we said to players who were called up, even though they were hurt, we said to the international teams, "Yeah, go ahead, have a look." And a number of times we had guys go away, and then the clubs went, the international teams went, "Oh yeah, fair enough, he is injured," and then they sent him back. Thanks for the stress of the flight, though. We told you he was injured. We've sent him across. You should just trust us. Like, I don't understand why they don't trust us. Anyway, they should, especially some of the countries who've probably got worse medical provision than Arsenal, and they're kind of suspiciously looking at Arsenal going, "Well, we're not sure he's actually injured."
Yeah. Again, this is so they're not looking at player welfare, but it is what it
exactly.
is. Well, look, Mitch, thank you. That's been superb, and I think we've learned a lot. I think as fans, we need to. Sorry to say this, trust the process. That might trigger some people, but these guys, I think they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They've got the team and the players' interests at heart. Everyone wants to win, and it's sometimes you just got to think bigger picture. But and then sometimes you just don't bloody walk under a ladder. Don't go kicking the black cats, and just be lucky. So I think
I've got one thing written here that's just people just need to accept the kind of normal distribution of injuries that happen, and because we don't look at other clubs as much, we're just conscious of everything that happens at Arsenal. And 2 years ago, we had an amazing season, much lower on the kind of average curve, L-shaped curve. So left is 0, right is the most injuries in the world. We had kind of less injuries than the average, so than the mean. And this year we had way more. But I think people just need to accept there will be 30 to 50-ish, depending on season to season, injuries. And about 20% of them will be re-injuries, of which 50% of all those re-injuries happen in the first month after coming back to play. And the 4 main injuries are going to be hamstring, groin, knee, hamstring strains, groin strains, and then knee sprains and ankle sprains. And we just need to accept it's going to happen without getting angry about it, because obviously the players don't want to get hurt. The medical team want to avoid that. The coaching staff want to avoid it. My mate who sits next to me at Arsenal, whenever we hear an Arsenal player's been injured and they say, "Oh, it's going to be 4 weeks," he always turns to me and says, "Plus inevitable setback," because he just presumes there's going to be some kind of inevitable setback, bless him, which sometimes happens. But again, that might just be because the athlete's pushing himself like crazy in training rather than half-arsing it and being a bit of a what was his name? A Cedric Suarez, and wanting to stay at Arsenal for 150 grand a week, even though he's not playing football. Go away and play football. I know I want to stay and get my 150 grand a week. So we just have to get used to it, which is why I get slightly less annoyed than the average fan about it, because you're just like, oh wow, it's a data point in a massive data point of football players playing football and getting hurt.
Well, actually, just on that last point, also you get less annoyed, but also are you the curse of being a doctor? You know too much, and so therefore you actually can tell when they're not telling the truth there.
When referees saunter over and take 35 seconds to decide whether the physio comes on or not, I get so annoyed. I'm literally shouting. Unless you're a medical professional, you don't have a decision to make.
Yeah.
Like if Gary Lewin hadn't been stood behind the goal when Abu Dhabi kicked John Terry in the face and nearly killed him. I'm not joking now. He obviously Gary Lewin just ran onto the pitch because he knew John
I
Terry
don't care
was
what the ref
choking on
says.
his own time. Exactly. I don't care what the ref said. If that had been nowadays in the Prem, the ref wouldn't have let him on. And it just so happened that Gary Lewin was close. I think he just dealt with an Arsenal player who was walking around. John Terry could have literally died on the football pitch because the referee's taking too long. So I get so frustrated. And then the other thing is people kind of shouting, I get frustrated when people say he's milking it when you've clearly seen someone take an elbow to the face. Like, he's bleeding. It's not, it's not Saracens from a few years ago where they pretended that guy was bleeding.
Yeah.
The guy's literally bleeding.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, and the fans are kind of chanting, Arsenal always cheating or whatever. And I'm like, he's literally bleeding off his eye. He's not faking it. He's been elbowed by a massive centre half.
Anyway. We don't need the refs to co-commentate. We need a physio like you to. Sorry, not a physio. We need a PE teacher like you to.
Yeah, my mum would be proud
to co-commentate, to give the reality of what's going on. So again, look, that's good. So look, anyway, we want to know more about your love for Arsenal. So enough of me, and over to you, Ian.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks very much, Tabs. And look, Mitch, I know you're stuck for a little bit of time from here in, so I won't keep you for too much longer. And again, just to echo what Tabs said, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, because as fans we can get really frustrated. Like, a lot of people give out about the club not doing the right things, which is nonsense. But I include myself in being frustrated, but it's great to hear a little bit of insight into how much effort goes into keeping our players as fit as possible, and just accept, as you said, that injuries are part and parcel of it all. But come here, I have a few questions just to get to know a little bit about you in terms of your Arsenal journey. We spoke about you earlier. I spoke to you earlier on about how you became an Arsenal fan, but we want to ask you a few questions. Like, what was the first game you ever watched? The first ever Arsenal game? Like, was it on TV? Or did you go to the game? What was the first one?
So my first game that I remember watching was the 79 Cup final, late win versus Man United. I would have been 6, just coming up to 7 at that point, with my parents. And then the first live game was an away game at Brighton. Yeah, because I lived on the South Coast. My parents moved out of London when I was a kid, so I grew up on the South Coast. So Brighton away, it was a 2-1 loss. Brian Talbot scored. As a name from the past, right? I know, right? And which is kind of a crazy experience for me. But then that next season, so the 82-83 season, my first time to Highbury, was Arsenal West Brom 2-0 win. Alan Sunderland and Tony Woodcock scored. So that was name blast from the past, right?
You bring that. Yeah, that's. I had my first season ticket 82-83 with my uncle. So I remember the Talbot, Sunderland, Woodcock. Love it.
Mm-hmm. But you two are really old. I was only born in 1979, Mitch. No, that's brilliant. We mentioned earlier on that you're a season ticket holder. You're one block beside me, and I have to say, you're one of my favourite people to see on a match day. We always have a quick half-time kind of debrief of what happened in the first half, and it's always great to see you. But do you have any on a match day? Do you have any match day superstitions or routines that you go through?
I have a few. So I always use the same football bowl. I've got a bowl that looks like a football. Well, half a football, obviously. When I'm at home on match days, I always have that. I just always have ever since I can remember. I always shout as soon as I see the pitch when I walk out of from the outside of the stadium, I guess, into the kind of the bowl. As soon as I see the pitch, I always shout, "Come on, you Gunners," because that's something my dad told me to do the first time I went to that West Brom game. I was like, "What do I do when I walk in?" He's like, "Just shout, 'Come on, you Gunners.'" Nice. I always walk past, and then the other thing is, I always, the mural just above the, to the left of the armory, the mural with all the fans on it.
Yeah.
So I'm on that with holding my daughter as a little baby. So I always walk past that and just look up,
nice,
and give her a bit of a smile. But routine wise, I'm a Tollington guy because we were Gunners before the stadium move, Gunners pub before the stadium move. But then because I'm where I sit, which is just above the armory, I wouldn't be able to get there in time. So I migrated to the Tollington. I don't even kind of drink alcohol. I just go there because I like the guys. I always kind of stand in the same corner, same area, and meet my mates there or meet random gooners from all over the world. Just kind of catch up. I love kind of telling stories to the guys, especially if it's their first game,
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's always special speaking to people who are there for the first time, and it kind of gives you a little reminder of your first time. And everybody
Yeah,
has a favorite pub. Like it's great. And I used to go to the Gunners as well when we were in Highbury. So up to now, in all these years that you've been supporting Arsenal, what would you say? What would you say your best memory is?
so I think I've seen every single cup final we won, but um, and I've been at Highbury the days when Tony Adams scored the goal. I was in the North Bank for that classic, the statue goal. Um, but
Oh
I
god, the North
genuinely,
Bank, that was bouncing up and down. I was
oh my
scared that day.
goodness, it's
Upper tier
terrifying.
North Bank.
Yeah,
I hope I hope
oh
the
my
engineers knew
goodness.
what they were doing, because that was bouncing up and down that
Yeah,
upper tier.
yeah. But my old man used to always stand somewhere where if someone's going to fall on you from behind, you can at least fall forward and get out of the way. But I think one of my biggest memories, apart from the season of the Invincibles, because that era I used to come up with the East Sussex Arsenal Supporters Club. Shout out to those guys, and we used to come up on a coach every weekend, and we used to sit either front row clock end, and I mean like front row,
Mhm.
or I think it was seat 47 or 46, which is basically the last seat before the white fence and then the away fans, which for some North London derbies is terrifying, especially as a youngster. Um, so we used to sit kind of front row clock end for the Invincible era. But I genuinely think the best Arsenal memory is when, we won the league at Tottenham, that obviously the second time. We didn't have tickets for that away game, so we all just went to Finsbury Park, and it's me and my four best mates all grew up as Arsenal fans, and we just spent the time kind of outside the 12 pins, and whatever that pub is on the opposite corner. I apologise, I don't know the other pub on the corner. It might have been called something different back in the day, and we were just there for the whole Arsenal match, right? And then, sorry, for the whole day. Before about 2 minutes before, maybe about an hour before kickoff, my mate, one of them, just went, "See you later then, lads," and he just walked off, and we're like, "I don't. He's in a huff. He's just gone." We didn't realise he'd actually gone to Tottenham, paid for a home ticket, sat in the home end, and watched us win the league.
Oh my God.
I know,
Wow.
right? He now talks about it like he wasn't terrified, but I'd have been terrified because I wouldn't have been able to not react to winning the league, right? But what's crazy is because he was in the home end, he wasn't kept in after the game, and he didn't stay and watch all the kind of Ashley Cole antics with the inflatable
Mm.
trophy. So when he walked back I was at the 12 pins by that point. We were inside, or kind of inside. Um, when he walked back into the 12 pins with a program to show he'd been to that match, random guys just lifted him up onto their shoulders and kind of paraded my mate round, he's the most quiet guy in the world. He was so uncomfortable, but we thought it's hilarious. Um, and yeah, just the fact that Jez was there, and we were and then for the rest of the evening, someone brought some footballs out. So just in that area between the on the corner of the 12 pins and the pub on the other side, we were just there all day, like celebrating. It was kind of like the
Nice.
moment when people said they went to Highbury after '89.
Yeah.
We were
Mm.
just in Finsbury Park and just had
The,
an
the, the fever
absolute
pitch, the fever pitch moment.
yeah. But very quickly, away game would be Real Madrid nil Arsenal 1. I was in the Bernabeu for that,
Oh wow.
which
Very
was
good.
Nice.
an insane experience.
Yeah.
But sat with a home fan, so we had to be sensible.
Oh, so yeah, and I hope you were sensible. Well, you're here to tell the tale, so you must have been.
Exactly. We survived.
And a couple of quick fire ones, like conversely to your best Arsenal memory. What's your
Yeah.
worst Arsenal memory?
Yeah, driving home after the loss in Paris with a car full of Arsenal fans. Those same lads I just said I spent
Mm.
the day with when we won the league. That was tough. Really, really tough. It was just
Was that driving back from the game, or?
yeah, from Paris.
Mm.
Yeah, it was it was just desolation and so near, so far. Obviously, we're winning to a point, and it's just I think people
Mm.
believed for a second that we might be able to hold on, but yeah, that wasn't fun. But genuinely, I try not to. I think it was Wenger that said this. I try not to go insane about the wins and then too kind of devastated by the losses. I try and be a
By the
bit more,
losses.
because otherwise, I have a reasonably stressful job, and I don't want to drag losses into work on a Monday. People are like, "Oh, are
No.
you feeling bad?" I'm like, "No, I'm all right. It's a loss, whatever."
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've matured.
Yeah. I'm
Exactly.
the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
now. Like for 10 minutes after the game, maybe half an hour, you'll be a bit gutted. But I think at our age, you just kind of get over
yeah.
it a bit better. Who would be your favourite current Arsenal player and why from the current squad?
Yeah, I would have said Odegaard because he's the guy that I think personality-wise, I'm most like, and I love the way he plays. But I had a privilege of spending some time on the field after the Newcastle game, and I spoke to most of the guys and spent a little bit of time with them. And Miles, honestly, Miles Lewis Skelly is such an engaging, dynamic, wonderful, enigmatic guy. And we had I'm not making out. I spent half an hour chatting to him. We had a few minutes talking, and he was just so down to earth and lovely, and genuinely kind of, he didn't seem affected by the fact he's already a world-class football player. He was just kind of like a normal bloke. Like I was chatting to one of my students at work. He was just very, very cool. So if for next season, when I get my new shirt, I'm probably going to go Lewis Skelly.
Nice. That's a good shout. Would you say, talking to him, that he was quite humble?
But
the thing is that's my point. He came across as just a guy that's just a genuine normal guy.
Like just a good guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And from 1979 to now, could you pick your favourite Arsenal player of all time? And this is a really tough question, I know.
Ian Wright by a mile. I absolutely adore Ian Wright. Not just for what he did for the club while he was the manager, while he was a player. Oh, here we go. Is that a signed shirt, Tabs?
Tabs is taking out his Ian Wright signed shirt.
That's lovely. I'm not just because of what he did as a player, but what he's done as an ambassador for Arsenal since. I think he's a class act. The support he gives for the women's women's team is huge. The way he still loves Arsenal. So many ex-Arsenal players kind of slag us off. I don't really understand why. But Ian's just such an advocate, and he played like I thought an average fan would play if they were given 10 minutes at the end of the game. Like his life depended on it, and just run until you can't move. So Ian Wright by a mile. We've obviously had a lot of world-class players, but definitely Ian for me.
Ian Wright's a legend. I started supporting Arsenal in the Ian Wright era, and the way him and the likes of Kevin Campbell, like just how they played with a smile on their face. You look at nowadays, sometimes you see these grumpy people playing football, but Ian Wright and Kevin Campbell, those guys just were so good. And you're 100% right. The stuff that Ian Wright does now for Arsenal is incredible. And
how does he not have a statue? I know Dennis is.
Yeah, I know.
How does Ian not have something? I don't get
it. He should have one. He absolutely should have one. But Mitch, that's all from me. Thank you so much again. I'm going to pass it back over to Tabs to wrap things up. But again, just from me to say thank you very, very much, and I look forward to seeing you on match day in August
for a half-time hug and chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, really good. Cheers, Ian. Actually, just on that Ian Wright thing, and given the current season, the transfer season, the way I found out that Ian Wright joined Arsenal, I was at university at the time, and it was just a tiny little article in the newspaper that Ian Wright has joined Arsenal for however 8 million, 4 million, whatever it was. And it's just such a contrast to now. Like I didn't even know it. Just sort of like just one day at university opened. Oh, we've got signed Ian Wright. Well, that's nice. So it's such a contrast to now. Can you imagine now? Jesus. Anyway,
so we'd want to play like him now.
Yes, indeed. So look, thank you, Mitch, for everything you've done this. I appreciate the time. Sorry about the technical hiccups and so on. So I'll be doing a lot of work in the post edit. But you're on the socials. You had a bit of an alter ego, or you still got the alter ego? Where can people find you on the socials?
My I don't really go on X much anymore, but my X handle was Negativo Arsenal, and it's basically a mick take of my best mate, who, bless him, is quite a negative Arsenal fan. So I started that X account just to kind of put some of his comments on it, and then I just started using it actually. But over on Bluesky, I'm Arsenal-PhD, so it's easy to find. And then LinkedIn, if people want to kind of have a professional chat.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes, and when we do all the socials and stuff like that, we'll put all in there. And Ian, where can we find you? Where and what do you get up to?
You can find me on all the platforms, all the social media platforms at Ars Cannon Pics, where you can send me in pictures of your cannons when you're on holiday or in London. Hopefully I'll find one over in Spain now over the next few days, and that's where you'll find me.
Cool, very good. Okay, cool. All right, okay. Well, look, thank you for listening. Thanks again for your time, Ian and Mitch. And look, our next show, we'll figure something out. I'm sure it'll be about squad and transfers and all that jazz in the next week or so. And we're going to be doing more community pods, and we got some cool guests lined up. So if you like what we do, follow us at the Grove Podcast on Bluesky and on Threads, and there we go. So as we always do, until the next time, come on, you Gunners.
See you.